Hi and welcome back to the program. In this video we're going to look at more complex decorators. A more complex decorator is a decorator that can accept arguments itself. For example, something like decorator with arguments 56. Something like that. So here, the decorator is now getting a set of arguments as well. Okay. And then my function too. I'm going to comment this one out. So now we need to create a decorator that will accept arguments. So this is naturally going to be a bit of a longer one. So I'm going to create the decorator with arguments. And this decorator is going to take in a single argument, in this case, the number. This number is going to be the 56. What goes inside here is my decorator, just as we had up here. And this decorator takes in the function. Then we use func tools to wrap around the function with this other function. And then we are gonna print in the decorator. And then we're gonna run the function. And then we're gonna essentially print after the decorator. Then we're gonna return the function that runs func. And finally, we also have to return my decorator. So we've gone a level deeper with this decorator with arguments. And that is very confusing because now we've got 3 levels of functions nested one inside another. And this is something that we can do in Python. We can define functions inside the functions, as we are doing. But it gets confusing very quickly. But don't worry, it doesn't go deeper than 3 levels when we are creating decorators. Okay, so let's run it and see what happens. And I made the typo. This should be wraps. My apologies. The error said module func tools has no attribute wrap. And it doesn't. It is wraps. My bad. So let's save that and run it again. And now we get the function. Just as we did above. So the function prints hello. But we're also seeing in the decorator and after the decorator. So we're running this function here. We have access to the number. So potentially, we could do something like if number is 56, we can print not running the function. And if not, we can run the function. So if the number is 56, we're going to print not running the function. And if the number isn't 56, if the number is something else, we are going to run the function. In this case, we're passing in 56, so we should see nothing, or not running the function printed out. And indeed we do. So that's really, really useful, even though it may not seem like it. For example, in a decorator with arguments, we can pass something like the user's permissions. If we're creating a website that has an admin page, we can pass in the user's permissions, and then if the user doesn't match the appropriate permissions, we don't show them the admin page, for example. In the decorator with arguments, we can also do other things, like, for example, inserting elements to a database. We can only insert some elements if they match some certain criteria, and things like that. So there's a lot of things that these decorators can be useful for, but it's also easy to misuse them and overuse them. I myself do not use decorators very often, but there are some scenarios where they are just so useful for very concisely doing things. For example, in the case where we have an admin page and we only want to show some people some admin pages, you just put this in front of the method that shows the admin page, and that can potentially deal with determining whether the user is an admin or not. If you don't do that, then you'll have a bunch of code in your method to deal with whether the user is an admin or not. And if you have many admin pages, you could potentially end up with a lot of duplicated code, which you get rid of if you use a decorator. And also something to remember is that sometimes your function may take in some parameters. And if it does, then you have to be able to deal with them. So your decorator should always, in this function that runs func, you should always have args and quargs, and you should always pass args and quargs to the function. That way, when we call the function using something like that, we will also pass in the parameters to this function, and they will be passed to this function there. So then when we run it, we get not running in the function, but we can print x plus y there. We will get 124 there, because they are being passed to the function that runs func, and then from that into the func itself, which is my function 2. So just to recap, my function 2 is this func here. The 57 is a number up here. So we first create a method that is a decorator that takes in a parameter, that's the number. It can take many parameters as well. Then we create the decorator. This one contains the wraps function, which is going to tell us, or tell Python, that this function here is going to be replacing this function down here. That function accepts any number of arguments and keyword arguments, because sometimes we will be calling that function with those arguments. And then it should also execute the function with those arguments. Finally, we can do things before or after the function if we want, or we can potentially entirely omit running the function and not run it. At the end, we have to return this function, and then we also have to return the decorator so that get applied. I would recommend keeping a hold of this template, in fact these two templates, for decorators with and without parameters, because as soon as you need a decorator, you will forget how to write them. So it's good to have a hold of these templates, because the first few times you'll forget, and then as you write some more, you will easily remember. And that's everything for this video, and indeed for the Python refresher. So we have covered everything that I wanted to cover, and if you weren't before, I hope that you are now ready to go into REST API development. So I'm very excited to get into that with you, and if you ever have any questions, let me know, and I'm always available to guide you personally and to answer questions. Without further ado, I'll see you in the next section.